Okay, I think I'm going to wrap up what's been covered off so far in the playlist. Uh, to proceed from here gets increasingly more complicated, which then relies on more general knowledge, not only of the products of P, but general knowledge in specific domain, like domain-specific areas, which I don't think I can cover off in small little tidbits. But there might be some opportunity to get into supply and demand curves, constant relations, operationalism in a little while. I don't think it needs to be covered off now. So let's just do a bit of a wrap up, and we'll take a look at some of the core concepts that we've covered here. Many people come into P for many different reasons. Some come in from evolutionary psychology and biology. So some of the acquisitionalism things relate to them, and group survival strategies and game theory with generous tit for tat. Others come in from a political sphere, so they're more interested in natural law or property in toto. Others, like myself, come in from epistemology, so we're interested in testimonialism and truth theories and so on. So you might be able to identify yourself within the chart here, what your interests are and where you move into. But none of these exist discretely independent from any of the others, and each become a critical component of understanding the others. So we began off with acquisitionalism, and that's the notion that at the most fundamental level, organisms must seek asymmetrical benefit. So biologically, the foundations that we work from is a set of detect, test, and react systems, stress systems, hormonal systems, sensory systems within our body that is geared towards acquiring, and then specifically acquiring calories. And then from there it stems off, acquiring mates, acquiring security, extending agency. So essentially animals that obtain agency, the most bare bones way of saying that is mobility, are driven by acquisitionalism. Now that isn't a reductionary statement to say all human behavior and all social behavior can be reduced to acquiring calories. That would be nonsense. But to ignore acquisitionalism as being what human behavior grounds into is equally nonsense. So how do I put that into a frame that makes sense, what grounded concepts are? Higher order, higher sophisticated concepts ground into lower concepts. So if you think concepts are built out of other concepts until you boil it down to its most basic level, which is generally factual, a factual level, a less sophisticated level. More sophisticated concepts ground into simpler concepts. So if you think of the very first wheelbarrow that man may have made, which we could categorize as moving things over a distance by revolving by a wheel, by the use of a wheel, that a Ferrari doesn't reduce down to a wheelbarrow, but a Ferrari, its ability to move around for fun and for status signals and all of these other things is still grounds down into the use of the wheel. Okay. So I think I will explore acquisitionalism more on the sheepdog group and elsewhere because it becomes the foundation for things like human psychology, behavior, which then spins into economics and sociology. But I don't want it to sound like I am reducing all of those things down to acquisitionalism. It's to say that it grounds into it. But out of acquisitionalism, we have the three ways to move the world, which is to say group survival strategies, well, survival strategies, and then from there, group survival strategies. And out of the possible group survival strategies, we have things like, if you look at game theory, where you have one group that they will test will be one that betrays all the time. So it's ethnocentric. It's always treat the outsider with betrayal, versus a group that is humanitarian, which is always extend generosity. So you have liars, then you have humanitarian. One is always lie, one is always be generous, and then the ones that tend to survive over the longest time horizon is a thing called generous tit for tat, where you offer up in the first interaction reciprocity or generosity, the opportunity to trade rather than steal, and then after that you behave back to the other person how they behave to you. So you offer trade the first interaction, the second interaction they steal, so then you steal. And then the next interaction, they predate, so then you predate. So generous tit for tat is the notion that you open generously, and then it's tit for tat. You mimic the behavior of the other person, and then intermittently, every now and then, you return back to a generous stance. And all we're doing there is giving an opportunity to reestablish trust. Well, what is tit for tat but reciprocity? So we know that reciprocity becomes the foundation of the most successful survival strategy, that being cooperation. Over the longest time horizons, reaping the most benefits, cooperation beats out all others. But then cooperation actually is one subset of reciprocity. So there's other things that are covered off with reciprocity as well. Things like violence for violence, betrayal for betrayal. These are also part of reciprocity. So we find that reciprocity becomes the foundation for the most successful survival strategies, and then specifically within the in-group of a social animal, limiting reciprocity to cooperation, positive externalities, you have the best chance to thrive. We also find out acquisitionalism, that the grounding for property, that mobile animals with agency, seek to extend their agency as well as extend their life, which is a form of agency, the ability, the opportunity. And then out of this instinct to survive, as well as this instinct to acquire or protect that which we acquire, we have the notion of property, the properties of behavior, the behavior of demonstrated interests. Demonstrated interest is to say that we tend to retaliate against, defend, or seek restitution when those things that we've invested in have been infringed upon. And when people behave that way, they're behaving according to property. We also talked about the evolution of trust and truth as it comes out of martial cultures, and the importance of that in terms of velocity, and that humans specifically survive out of a process of information, information processing. We use our intellect, our reason, as much as we do anything else. And we use that reason to extend our agency through things like tools or storage. For instance, extend our life through storing food, or building shelters to mediate the risks of climate. Humans use information to extend agency. The extension of agency is property. And if you are to use information to extend agency or to secure or ensure survivability, you need accurate information. So for reciprocity to survive, there must be a value on trust and truth, being sincere and accurately reporting. And then that leads into testimonialism, in that testimonialism is a robust criteria to warrant the exchanges of information between humans. So it becomes a critical pillar in maintaining cooperative reciprocity, calculated by property, based on information that we need to survive. And that Western sovereignty, that sovereignty is really a commons. It's created through group effort. People are investing in it by risking their lives, and they seek to protect it by defending it. and also to maintain it through things like rule enforcement. So sovereignty is a property. We can gauge or measure sovereignty, the value of a sovereignty, by its degree of reciprocity, reciprocity across scales, and notions like liberty and freedom are reciprocal acts of taking opportunity costs on, that is to say, a restriction on our autonomy to maintain the broader conditions that are required for autonomy to be ensured and secured. And that Western sovereignty in particular was able to achieve this by placing a value on trust or truth, what others would call logos. We also talked about truth theories. And when we move from truth theories into testimonialism, we see that really what's going on when we talk about truth is we're talking about trustworthiness. And this might help explain why quite often you'll hear us say things like it's a completion of the scientific method, or that it's a scientific approach. It's not to say that we use science to do this. It's to say that science is a grammar of disambiguation based on testimonialism. The scientific method is nothing more than a scientist's criteria, their shared criteria, to say that I testify accurately that this will happen if you do this experiment, and how they warranty that promise. And that all speech acts measure the speaker, that every declarative speech act is a promise. It's not a declaration of the world. We're not gods. We don't define things. We promise to people that if they observe what we observed, they'll observe it the same way. And then we call that truth. So I think from here, depending on where you're coming into propertarianism, you'll kind of have one of the main, or within these videos, you'll have some explanation of the main pillar or silo that you're coming into propertarianism from. It gets far more robust from here. We can move into group survival strategies. Then we can move into civilizational cycles and how temperament, as it relates to acquisitionalism, changes in response to reduced predation pressure and increased carrying capacity, or increased approaching carrying capacity, and how those stressors change, and then that changes the strategy of acquisitionalism, and that this changes the temperament within the group, which then changes sort of the politics of the group. That reciprocity, if you look at the history of natural law, or a history of international law, or you look at the evolution of common law long before that term ever came up, or its origins in Germanic and Celtic tribes, that in the absence of a strong authority to decree, rules amongst groups that have agency, or individuals that have agency, incrementally approximate reciprocity. So laws, we pass a rule or a law, or we adopt a rule, and some rules don't work and they drop away, and other rules do work and they survive. So they survive, they succeed in surviving the tests of precedent through things like common law. Where common law isn't decreed, it's judge discovered as a precedent, and if the precedent changes, then that rule changes. So the laws that survived the longest are the ones that have a common theme, and that common theme is reciprocity. So that just gives you an indication that reciprocity, the logic and the arguments and the evidence behind it and the operations behind it when we're talking about reciprocity, is far deeper than just what was in this video. Same thing with property in total. There's greater depths to any of these. This might help you with the initial lingo. So if you're coming in from biology, it's acquisitionalism. If you're coming in from philosophy, it's testimonialism. If you're coming in from politics, it's sovereignty and property and natural law. If you're coming in from sociology, it's trust and truth, etc. I think this will get most people started. We'll see how this goes, and then maybe I'll add some more in for things that people are needing or requiring. Agency is one that needs to be put up here at some point. Just briefly, I have my own take on agency that's slightly different than Kurt's, in that I break out agency and autonomy into two different concepts, and that agency is nothing more than the ability to affect the world. So there is no notion that a person's act is a result of other determining factors. It doesn't matter. They are still the source of that consequence. And that autonomy is the ability to be beyond those deterministic factors, or to affect the outcomes, the probability of outcomes in the midst of those determining factors. So I make the distinction where a lot of propertarians will say people that have more agency, where I would use the term, those are people that have more autonomy. And that we all have agency. It's just the degree at which we have control or effect on it. And then that ties into acquisitionalism, is that what we're doing in not only acquiring calories, but in acquiring and making tools or building shelters. And every step of the way, what we're doing is we're extending agency. And by doing that, we gain greater autonomy until it reaches the point where that autonomy has to be defended. And then sovereignty becomes a question. And that's because it's the property that's being stolen, and that it's non-reciprocal, which is natural law, right? So, and that the effectiveness to adapt and deal with that situation pertains to clear, disambiguated truth or information, which ties into truth. And then how do you incorporate that into a society? You do that through truthful testimony. Good luck with it. I hope this helps. It's the best I could do, given the time that I have and having zero preparation. So I wish you the best.